Mark never questioned Anna's late-night drives, at least not at first. It started as something small, almost insignificant. She'd sigh after dinner, rub her temples, and say something like, "I just need to clear my head." Then she'd grab her keys and disappear into the night, leaving Mark alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the glow of the television. She had always been independent. That was one of the things he loved about her. They had built their marriage on trust, 20 years of ups and downs, laughter and grief, but always trust. So when she first started taking these drives, he didn't pry. But over time, something shifted. At first it was the duration. An hour turned into 2, then 3. She started coming home later, slipping into bed with barely a word. Some nights he'd already be asleep when she returned. And then there was her mood. She was lighter somehow, distracted, distant, as if she carried a secret that made her feel weightless. One night, as Mark sat on the couch, absently swirling the whiskey in his glass, his unease finally took shape. A question gnawed at the edges of his mind. If these drives were really about clearing her head, why did she seem happier afterward? Shouldn't she be more exhausted, more drained? Something didn't add up. His first instinct was to dismiss the thought. This was Anna. His Anna, the woman who used to leave little notes in his briefcase, who would squeeze his hand under the dinner table just to let him know she was there. The woman who had promised him forever. But then, on a whim, he checked the mileage on her car. She had filled up the tank 2 days ago, yet somehow she had barely put any miles on it. Mark felt his stomach drop. That was the moment everything changed. That night, as Anna grabbed her keys and murmured her usual excuse, Mark forced a smile and nodded. "Drive safe," he said, kissing her cheek. But as soon as the front door closed, he sprang into action. He waited exactly 5 minutes before slipping on his jacket, grabbing his own keys, and heading out the door. The city at night had always felt calm to him. Streetlights flickered, traffic was sparse, and the world seemed to exhale after a long day. But tonight, every passing car felt like a phantom, every red light an unbearable delay. He followed her at a safe distance, keeping his headlights dim. She wasn't just driving aimlessly like she had claimed. Her route was deliberate. 15 minutes later, Anna's car turned into a nearly empty parking lot behind an old diner, one that had closed years ago. Mark slowed to a stop a short distance away, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. His heart pounded as he watched her car idle in the darkness. And then, as if the night itself had betrayed him, the passenger door opened. A man slid into the seat beside her. Mark felt the ground shift beneath him. Derek, their old friend, sitting too close, laughing, touching her hand. The truth, undeniable now, settled in Mark's chest like a cold, heavy stone. Anna wasn't driving to clear her mind. She was driving straight to him. Mark sat frozen in his car, his breath shallow, hands clenched around the steering wheel as he stared through the windshield. His worst suspicions had just been confirmed, but the reality of it still felt unreal. The dim glow of the dashboard cast eerie shadows across his face, mirroring the storm of emotions raging inside him. Anna had lied to him, over and over, and now, here she was, parked in a deserted lot with another man. Derek, of all people. A longtime friend, a familiar presence in their lives. Mark felt the sharp sting of betrayal twist inside his chest. At first he considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was some explanation. Perhaps it was an innocent meeting, a conversation between friends. But as he watched, it became clear there was nothing innocent about this. Derek leaned toward Anna, his face just inches from hers, his hand resting lightly on her knee. She didn't pull away. She didn't look uncomfortable. Instead, she tilted her head back slightly and laughed. Softly, intimately. It was the kind of laugh Mark hadn't heard from her in months. The sight of it sent a pulse of heat through his veins, anger and hurt crashing together in a toxic wave. His jaw tightened as he gritted his teeth, trying to control the rising urge to storm over and rip Derek out of that car. Instead, Mark forced himself to breathe. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and turned on the camera. His fingers trembled slightly as he zoomed in, snapping a few photos. The grainy images on his screen told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an innocent late-night conversation. It was an affair. Anna was cheating on him. For a moment, Mark closed his eyes, his pulse pounding against his temples. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. He had trusted her completely. He had never been the jealous or controlling type, always believing that a relationship built on trust would never need constant questioning. But trust, he realized now, was a dangerous thing to give to the wrong person. His fingers hovered over his phone screen. He could call her right now, watch her scramble as she looked at her phone, knowing she had been caught. He could step out of his car, walk right up to hers and knock on the window, watching as their secret world collapsed in front of them. But no, that would be too easy. Instead, he took a deep breath and gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing himself to stay calm. This moment wasn't about a dramatic confrontation. It was about knowing the truth, about gathering the evidence he needed to make sure Anna couldn't twist the narrative when everything came crashing down. He watched as Derek reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from Anna's face. The tenderness in the gesture made Mark's stomach turn. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she come home to him, slipping under the covers with the scent of another man still lingering on her skin? A flood of memories rushed through Mark's mind. Late-night conversations where she reassured him she just needed space. Mornings where she kissed him goodbye with the same lips that had likely touched Derek hours before. Every little detail, every excuse she had made, now fit together like pieces of a puzzle he wished he had never started putting together. A sudden movement in the car pulled him from his thoughts. Anna glanced toward the windshield, her expression shifting slightly. Had she seen him? Mark tensed, his grip tightening on the phone in his lap. But no, she was just checking her surroundings, making sure they were still hidden. The cowardice of it all hit him like a punch to the gut. If what they were doing was harmless, why the secrecy? Why the isolated lot, the hushed voices, the stolen touches in the dark? As if to hammer the final nail into the coffin, Derek leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Anna's cheek before trailing lower, just near her collarbone. She closed her eyes, exhaling softly. That was it. Mark couldn't sit there any longer. His body moved before his mind could stop it. His hand found the door handle, pushing it open with a quiet click. He stepped out into the night, the cold air biting against his skin, but he barely felt it. His heart pounded in his chest as he took slow, deliberate steps toward the car. Anna and Derek were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't notice the shadow moving toward them. Not until the headlights of Mark's car flashed on, illuminating them in stark, unforgiving brightness. Anna's head snapped up, her eyes going wide with shock. Derek flinched, his hand jerking away as if he had been burned. For a brief, satisfying moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, realization settled in. Anna's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights, because that's exactly what she was. Mark took another step forward, his voice calm, but razor-sharp. "Well," he said, his eyes locking onto Anna's, "I guess late-night drives do clear your mind after all." The color drained from her face. Derek swallowed hard. Mark felt something shift inside him. The hurt was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now there was something else, too. Control. Anna had thought the darkness would keep her secrets safe. She had been wrong. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap at the slightest movement. The car's headlights cast long shadows, illuminating the guilt painted across Anna's face, and the panic tightening Derek's jaw. Mark stood just feet away, the cold air wrapping around him, but the fire inside him burned hot enough that he barely felt it. Anna was the first to move. She scrambled, fumbling for the door handle like a trapped animal. The door swung open and she stumbled out, her hands raised slightly, as if that would somehow soften the weight of her betrayal. "Mark," she breathed, her voice shaky. I can explain." Mark let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the empty parking lot. "Explain?" He took a slow step forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Oh, please, Anna. I'd love to hear an explanation that makes this anything other than what it is." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing she could say, no excuse, no twisted version of the truth that could erase the reality of what he had just seen. Derek finally spoke, his voice forced and measured, as if he thought he could still control the situation. "Mark, listen, man." "Shut the hell up." Derek's mouth snapped shut, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Mark turned his attention back to Anna, watching as she struggled to find anything that might soften the blow. Her breath was uneven, her fingers twisting together in a nervous knot. For the first time in their 20-year marriage, she looked like a stranger to him. "How long?" His voice was quieter now, but no less sharp. Anna flinched. She didn't ask him to clarify. She knew exactly what he meant. "Mark, please." "How long?" Her eyes darted away, her chest rising and falling in rapid succession. For a moment it looked like she might try to lie, but then, perhaps realizing the futility of it, her shoulders slumped and her lips parted. 6 months, she whispered. Mark sucked in a breath through his nose, forcing himself to stay still, to keep his voice level. 6 months. Half a year of deception. Half a year of her slipping out the door, kissing him goodbye with the taste of someone else still lingering on her lips. The betrayal pressed down on him like a weight, but beneath it, something else coiled. Something sharper. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "You thought you could just keep sneaking around, lying to my face and I'd never notice?" Anna shook her head quickly. "It wasn't like that, it's—" Mark cut her off with a humorless chuckle. "Spare me the bullshit, Anna. I saw you. I have pictures. You can't talk your way out of this." Derek took a cautious step out of the car, hands raised as if he thought that might protect him from Mark's fury. "Mark, listen! I never wanted this to happen." Mark turned on him, his eyes cold. "Oh, don't start playing the victim now, Derek. You knew exactly what you were doing." Derek's lips pressed together and he dropped his gaze. He had no defense, no argument, because there was none. He had been sneaking around with Mark's wife like a coward, meeting in dark parking lots like teenagers afraid of getting caught. The rage inside Mark simmered, but he refused to let it explode. Not yet. There was a time for everything, and right now, control was his weapon. He shifted his gaze back to Anna. "Tell me," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Was it worth it?" Tears welled up in her eyes, her hands trembling at her sides. "Mark, I never meant to hurt you." He barked out a laugh. "Right. You just meant to betray me, over and over again. But hurting me? That was just an unfortunate side effect?" She took a step closer, reaching out as if she could erase everything with a simple touch. "I still love you." Mark recoiled as if she had struck him. The words, so absurd, so cruel in their irony, sent a fresh wave of disgust rolling through him. "You don't get to say that," he said, his voice dropping into something dangerous. "You lost the right to say that the second you chose him." Anna's face crumpled, but he felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness, just the steady, growing certainty that he was done. Derek, sensing the shift, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all just take a step back, cool down." Mark's head snapped toward him. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Derek. You're nothing. Less than nothing." Derek had the decency to look ashamed. Or maybe he was just afraid. Either way, Mark didn't care. He turned back to Anna, his decision crystallizing in that moment. He had spent years loving this woman, building a life with her, believing they were partners. And yet, here they were. "I hope he was worth it," Mark said, his voice steady. "Because it's over." Anna let out a soft gasp. "Mark, wait!" "No." He shook his head. "You made your choice, Anna. Now you get to live with it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone in the cold night. As he slid back into his car, he didn't look back. He had seen enough. Anna and Derek had thought the darkness would keep their secret safe. But now, the truth was out, and Mark was done playing the fool. Mark drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The air inside the car was thick, suffocating, but the cold night outside felt even worse. He had never imagined this moment. Not once in their 20-year marriage had he thought he would be the man whose wife had betrayed him. The man who would have to pick up the broken pieces of a life he thought was whole. His mind replayed the scene in the parking lot over and over again, like a film stuck on an endless loop. Anna's guilty eyes, Derek's pathetic attempt at justification, the way they both had frozen under the glare of his headlights like cornered criminals. He had expected anger from himself, Rage, so consuming he'd feel the need to lash out, to throw punches, to scream. But what he felt now was worse. It was a hollow emptiness, a kind of deep exhaustion that settled into his bones, as if all the energy had been drained from him the moment Anna confessed 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of sneaking. Of whispered conversations. Of nights spent in another man's arms while he had been home, trusting her, loving her, waiting for her. He gritted his teeth and swallowed down the bile that rose in his throat. He had been a fool. Pulling into the driveway, he turned off the engine, but didn't move. The house loomed before him, dark and quiet, a place that had once been a refuge but now felt like a tomb. He wasn't ready to go inside. Not yet. Instead, he leaned his head back against the seat and exhaled slowly. He needed a plan. He wouldn't let Anna twist the story, wouldn't allow her to paint herself as the victim in this mess she had created. He had the photos. He had the truth. He would make sure everyone knew it. The thought of their mutual friends sent another wave of nausea rolling through him. How many of them had known? Had anyone seen the signs, suspected something and decided not to tell him? Or worse, had they covered for her? Had she sat across from their closest friends at dinner parties, laughing and smiling while carrying on this disgusting charade? The more he thought about it, the clearer his path became. He wouldn't be quiet. He wouldn't fade into the background while she rewrote history. No, he would take control. With that decision made, he finally stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at his skin. He walked up to the house, unlocking the door and stepping inside. The silence was deafening. For years this had been their home, a place filled with warmth, love, and shared memories. Now, it was nothing more than a shell. A house occupied by ghosts of what once was. He walked straight to the bar cart in the corner of the living room, pouring himself a glass of whiskey with steady hands. He wasn't the kind of man who drank to escape, but tonight was different. Tonight, he needed something to dull the ache in his chest, if only for a little while. He took a slow sip, letting the burn settle in his throat. As he set the glass down, his phone buzzed on the table. Without even looking, he knew who it was. Anna? For a second he considered ignoring it, letting her sit in her panic and regret. But then, with a sigh, he picked up the phone and answered. "Mark?" Her voice was small, desperate. "Please, can we talk?" He let the silence stretch between them for a moment before responding. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. She let out a shaky breath. I know I messed up. I don't even have the right words right now, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "That's the thing, Anna. You didn't just mess up. You made a choice, over and over again. And hurting me? That was just an inevitable consequence." "I want to lose you," she whispered. You already did." His voice was firm, unyielding. "You lost me the second you decided I wasn't enough." Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I still love you." Mark closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly. Once, those words had meant everything. Now they meant nothing. "Love doesn't look like this," he said quietly. "Love isn't sneaking around in parking lots. Love isn't lying to the person who trusts you the most. Love isn't choosing someone else when you already have a home." She sniffled on the other end, but he felt no sympathy. This was a bed she had made for herself, and now she had to lie in it. Alone. "I'll come by tomorrow," she said finally, her voice barely holding together. I think we should talk in person." Mark shook his head. "No. There's nothing left to say. I'll have my lawyer reach out." The weight of his words hit her immediately. "Wait, you're serious? You're just ending it like this?" Mark exhaled, feeling an odd sense of relief at how easy the answer was. "Yes." She let out a small sob, but he didn't waver. This was the end of them. There was no coming back from this. Without another word, he ended the call. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he felt in control. The pain was still there, the betrayal still raw, but there was something else now too, a freedom. Anna had thought she could keep her secrets hidden in the dark, but now her lies had nowhere left to hide. The morning arrived with an eerie sense of finality. Mark stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection as the reality of his new life settled in. He should have felt emptier, should have felt broken, but instead, there was a strange calmness within him, a weight lifted that he hadn't even realized he had been carrying. Anna had tried calling again, 3 more times in fact, but he let them ring out, each call going straight to voicemail. She had already said everything that needed to be said, and so had he. There was no room left for negotiation, no space for regret or second-guessing. He stepped out of the bathroom and into his bedroom, taking in the space with new eyes. The bed where they had shared laughter, whispered dreams, and now the ghosts of broken promises felt foreign. He knew that by the end of the week he would have it replaced. Downstairs, the scent of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, though he barely tasted it as he took a slow sip. His mind was already on the next step. Divorce. It was a word he never thought he would associate with himself, yet here he was, drafting an email to a lawyer recommended by a friend. He kept it brief, factual, unemotional. There was no need to pour his heart into legal proceedings. That part of him had already been spent in that parking lot. By noon, the world knew. He hadn't planned to make it public, but the moment Anna had realized he wasn't going to engage in any last-minute reconciliations, she had begun reaching out to friends, trying to spin the story before he could. Mark had no interest in letting her rewrite history, so he made sure the truth was clear. A few messages to close friends, a quiet confirmation to family. No drama, no embellishments, just the facts. Anna had an affair. It's over. I've already contacted a lawyer. People reacted the way he expected. Some were shocked, some admitted they had suspected something, and some simply offered quiet support. What surprised him most was Derek's response, or lack thereof. The man who had so arrogantly inserted himself into Mark's marriage had suddenly gone silent. No apologies, no excuses, not even a pathetic attempt to justify what he had done. Perhaps he knew there was nothing he could say that would fix it. By evening, Anna sent one final message. Mark, I know you won't answer, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I wish I could undo everything, but I can't. I know I ruined us. And I hate myself for it. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Mark stared at the screen for a long time before locking his phone and setting it aside. Forgiveness? Maybe. Someday. But not today. Instead of responding, he grabbed his keys and walked out the front door. The night air was crisp, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe. There was no more waiting, no more wondering, no more searching for answers that had been right in front of him all along. Anna had chosen secrecy, darkness, and deception. Mark was choosing something else, a new beginning, and as he drove away from the house that had once held his past, he finally let it all go.